started YouTube or Kick yet. And now YouTube and Kick are up. So that's the bank that I usually look at when I'm looking at all these different things. So today we are going to talk about, if I can find it, ADHD and autism. And if I can find my, there we go. So I have really not looked specifically into AD, AUDHD. I want to see. Okay, so I'm just going to look up literally at the first thing that pops up. I think I've seen this dude.
What's going on, YouTube?
He's had some controversy surrounding him. Not enough that I'd be too concerned about him. So, but at least that I know of.
YouTube, it's your boy Dr.
I
Cody.
think he was he was accused of stealing people's material, which he may or may not have done. I don't know.
Your Hollywood mental health expert, and I'm going to be answering a very common question again. There's a lot of these common questions, so we'll start off with those as I do these daily videos. And this video is coming from a nursing student. It can be applied to anybody in general, but a nursing student who has AuDHD, so ADHD and autism. But she was asking about how to make it in life when you have ADHD and autism. And she mentioned a couple of things about depression and OCD, I want to say. So it might not be just pure ADHD and autism, because you can throw the depression in and the OCD and the other conditions. But for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna make it a bit more broad so that way multiple people can extract some type of value out of this video. So how do you maintain in life when you have ADHD and autism? So maintaining is one thing. It's good to maintain, right? It's good to be able to keep your head above water, but that's not what we're aiming for. Not around here. No ma'am, no ham, no turkey. Not in my community. We aim to thrive. We want to thrive in life, not just survive. We want to thrive in life. And it is possible to thrive when you have AuDHD, right? ADHD and autism. But you have to understand how those conditions impact you. So if you're watching this video right now and you have ADHD and you're also autistic, but you might be watching this video right now with 4 other people who have the same diagnoses as you, but your lives could be completely different. And ADHD, there's different types of ADHD, right? Inattentive, hyperactive / impulsive, combined type. Autism, there's different levels, level 1, 2, 3. Level 1, not needing so much support, but you do need some support.
You kind of rambling.
You have a couple of social struggles when it comes to communication, things of that nature. And level 3, you'll need considerable support. May not.
Yeah, okay. We know what autism and ADHD is. Let's talk about the two together.
To live life independently. There's a spectrum on both ends, and I'm not sure why my my phone keeps going off. Nobody wants to text me when I'm free, but when I'm making a video on YouTube, that's when everybody wants to text me. I'm sure I'll get a couple more texts here in a second, but even though I have ADHD, I know how to stay locked in. So ADHD and autism, even though we refer to autism as being on the spectrum, you can also kind of say the same thing about ADHD, because no two ADHDers are alike. It's a very interesting diagnosis. And even for me, the person that I am today, and my struggles are different from my struggles 5 years ago. And the whole time I've had ADHD. It's not going anywhere. ADHD is not going anywhere. You don't grow out of it. Same autism. It's going to be there. So you have to understand how these conditions impact and affect you. So let's start off with the autism part first. Let's break this down systematically, one by one. We're going to put these pieces together. We're going to make this puzzle come together, and it's gonna make sense to you by the end of this video. Let's take the autism part, right? So if you have ADHD and you're autistic, the autism part, how does autism affect you? If you're watching this video and you want to know how to thrive with ADHD and autism,
dude, you gotta say something within the first like half hour of the video. How long did
what's
that
going on
go?
YouTube? It's your boy.
You went on for a long time.
Point.
All right, we're
novelty and creates a lot of chaos that is kind of the antithesis of structure and rigidity. When you're AuDHD, your autism can bore your ADHD, and your ADHD can overstimulate your autism.
There we go. There we go. Okay, I like this girl. She's like putting it down.
Often feels like you're completely at war with yourself, even though from the outside it looks like you're not struggling with either one, when really you're dealing with both. Which is how so many of us end up misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, or just straight up ignored for so long. So today we're going to talk about what it's really like to be AuDHD. And if you see yourself in this video, I really encourage you to go to the description and check out my autism and ADHD discovery binders, which are just digital binders that will help you track your traits and learn more about yourself and your brain. Hi there, my name is Megan, and this is the Neurocuriosity Club, the only YouTube channel that I'm aware of that is specifically for people who think they might be ADHD, they might be autistic, but they're just not sure. Let's get curious about our brains together. So basically in this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the main traits of both autism and ADHD, and then at the end, I'll walk you through what it's like to experience both of those at the same time when you are AuDHD. Autistic trait number 1 is hyper.
Okay, so like... The autism sucks. The ADHD sucks. The autism and ADHD really sucks. That's how it works.
And or hyposensitivity to sensory input. Now, you've probably heard a lot about hypersensitivity to sensory input, right? You know, a lot of autistic people, we can't stand the seam on our socks, or we can hear electricity and it drives us bananas, you know, those sorts of things. But there's also a flip side to that, which can be hyposensitivity to sensory input. Hyposensitivity to sensory input can look like having a really high pain tolerance. You know, maybe you just don't perceive pain as readily as holistic folks.
And that's very, very true. All of us can be both. And we can also, the same person can be both. Sometimes I can be hypersensitive in some things, particularly in touch and so forth, and sometimes I can be hyposensitive. It can depend on your brain state, but like in general, no matter what, cold hurts really bad, but I can tolerate cold. And heat, I can't tolerate it, but it doesn't hurt at least.
Many autistic folks are hyposensitive to interoception, as in our body's internal cues, like telling us we're hungry, thirsty, or tired. And while
and my sister-in-law just passed about 4 months ago, 3-4 months ago, because she did not know that she needed to go to the bathroom from interoception issues. She was autistic. She was 56, and she lived right here in the same home with me. And she said that she hurt one day, and she went to the emergency room, and she was backed up and was septic and died.
the vast majority of autistic folks do tend to lean towards hyper or hyposensitivity when it comes to sensory issues. Many of us experience both hyper and hyposensitivity based on the context. Oh, and one more thing. Most people know about the main 5 senses, right? Sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. But it turns out there's actually a couple more senses that you might want to be aware of when it comes to autistic hyper and or hyposensitivity. And they are proprioception, which is awareness of your body in space, vestibular, which is your sense of balance, and interoception, which I already mentioned, which is your body's internal cues. Some autistic folks might be hypersensitive to touch, but hyposensitive to sound. Or some autistic folks might be hypersensitive to light touch, but pain they tend to be hyposensitive to. It's a whole spectrum. Common autistic trait number 2 is alexithymia. Now, alexithymia is a word to describe when you're not sure what you're feeling. Many autistic folks will be aware that they're experiencing a feeling, but they can't name it, and they're definitely not sure where it's from. Many autistic folks...
Now, alexithymia is what took my son's life. Alexithymia is, I've also got, but it is literally what took my son's life. He committed suicide at 22 last October.
Experience alexithymia, which basically looks like knowing that you're feeling something, but like you're not sure what that is. And alexithymia can make our third trait.
My son described it as emotional numbness, which is a good way of putting it.
So much more complicated. So let's dive into that. Autistic trait number 3 is emotional dysregulation, which basically means that our emotions don't always feel like they're in our control. Now, no one can control their emotions perfectly, or else we would all just be like totally happy all of the time, and that's not how life works. But when you experience emotional dysregulation, it feels like there's a light switch in your brain that like a toddler is playing with and just flipping it up and down and up and down and up and down. One minute you can feel totally content and like everything's okay and you're safe and sound and happy. And then literally the smallest thing can happen and it's like the dial gets turned up to 11 and you're just furious or devastated or so anxious you can't breathe.
And I'll say that inappropriate emotions. You may know that dropping that pencil is not the end of the world, but you feel like it is the end of the world because you dropped that pencil on the floor, and for whatever reason, that's just the end of the world. And that can be, you can know that you just dropped a pencil. You didn't even hurt the lead. It didn't hurt anything. It's fine, but it doesn't matter. And that's when it gets really, really bad, when your emotions are that dysregulated that they don't even necessarily match what emotions you might or would be appropriate to have.
Emotional dysregulation sucks, and frankly, it's one of the most disabling parts of my AuDHD. And if you have alexithymia as well, it can make emotional dysregulation so much more confusing. Because you'll feel these really big emotions, but you won't be able to name what they are. Am I mad? Am I bored? Am I sad? I don't even know. That is what alexithymia plus emotional dysregulation can look like, and it's a very common experience for a lot of autistic folks. Autistic trait number 4 is black and white thinking. Many autistic folks think in black and white, and I don't mean that that means we can't see nuance. It's more like either we see all the nuance or we see no nuance. And it's kind of black and white in that sense. And oftentimes, if we're going to see all the nuance, it's a very intentional decision to see all the nuance. If we allow our brains to do what they do naturally.
And a lot of times I see the nuance. It just does not register in my brain in the sense that my brain cannot compute that people would not see it as black and white, as see something as right or wrong. Like if you hurt someone, that's wrong. My brain does not compute that someone would see that hurting someone is a good thing, you know, in any circumstance. Hurting another human being is not good, no matter what. So there are certain things, or a lot of times, and I give this example, and I've given this example for years. Now I know why. It's because I'm autistic. But let's say someone says, "I'm going to rape your daughter and your wife," and so what the expectation is that I mediate and that I meet the middle ground and say, "Well, you can just rape one." No, there's some things that are black and white. No, it's right or wrong. Period. End of story. Not gonna happen. And that's the one extreme. But I don't understand where neurotypicals will take something that extreme, like right now, that we are no longer a democracy. We're actually a dictatorship, just because of what the Supreme Court decision. But nobody's really okay, that's weird. Okay, anyway, moving right along. But you know, it's I don't see that nuance at all.
A lot of times they tend toward black or white, yes or no, all or nothing thinking. Autistic trait number 5 is stimming. Now, stimming is a human thing. Stimming just means self-stimulatory behavior, and it can look like tons of common day stuff, like jiggling your knee in a meeting, or twirling your hair, or a big one that I like to do is I rub my fingernails on my lips because they're really smooth and it feels really good. Autistic folks just tend to stim more and get more nervous system regulation out of that practice. Plus, many autistic people tend to stim in a full body kind of way, which can look like jumping or hand flapping or twirling. Just because our stims tend to be more obvious doesn't mean that they're more unusual. All humans stim. Autistic trait number 6 is meltdowns. Now, meltdowns have been misunderstood for years, and it's time that we set the record straight.
And mostly for being tantrums, which tantrums are motivated for a specific cause. I want this, therefore I'm going to throw a temper tantrum so that my parents give in or whatever, and I get this. With a meltdown, it's I am overstimulated because of this, and therefore I'm screaming, crying, whatever it is, however the meltdown manifests. It may be internalizing.
Autistic meltdowns are not tantrums. Autistic meltdowns are not manipulation. Autistic meltdowns are not about you, actually. Autistic meltdowns are about our brain feeling like it's on fire. The best way I can describe an autistic meltdown is a lack of control. It's like when you're usually living your life, it's like you've got a game controller and you're like, okay, I will walk over here and I will drink that coffee and I will text that friend, and you're controlling everything with a controller. In an autistic meltdown, it's like someone yanks the controller out of your hand, throws it on the floor and breaks it, and you feel like you're never going to have any control in your life again. Intellectually, I know that the meltdown will end and I will feel okay again. But in that moment, even though I know it intellectually, it does not feel true emotionally.
The autism does not care, is the way I put it. The autism doesn't care.
I feel so lost in so much pain. A meltdown hurts physically, emotionally, mentally. It is a painful experience, and we're not doing it on purpose. Believe me.
It's something that it's the last thing that we want to happen to us.
If we could not feel this way, we would. I actually take medication to reduce the intensity and frequency of my meltdowns because they are so debilitating and unsafe. Personally, my meltdowns are mostly internal rather than external. So a classic meltdown, an external meltdown, might look like throwing things, breaking things, slamming doors, punching walls, screaming. All of that is not about you. It's not to manipulate you. It's not anything like that. It's a lack of control. However, my meltdowns tend to be internal, which means I'm doing all of those things, like the throwing things, the breaking things, the screaming, but it's all in my head. I am yelling at myself, berating myself, degrading myself, just yelling about what a horrible, horrible person I am. Or I could be yelling at somebody else in my head, but I would never dare say it out loud. It's, instead of spiraling out of control, it's spiraling down and in, and it's really painful as well. I know it can be safer, which is good, but it still hurts. And one more thing I want to mention about meltdowns before we move on is that there's also something called shutdowns. Shutdowns are more dissociative. It's more like, oh, I can't control this. I'm offline. I'm just gone. Many autistic people experience verbal.
This gal's just doing a great job, by the way. Let's see. What is the Neuro Curiosity Club? So I don't know what her name is, but I think she did say what her name was at the beginning.
Shutdowns, which is where you temporarily lose the ability or capability to speak. So sometimes it's like, okay, I could speak, but it would be so uncomfortable and so hard that it's not worth it. Other folks go into a shutdown and it's sort of like autopilot takes over and they become this weird, distant, automaton version of themselves. And even though shutdowns might be safer than a full-blown meltdown where you could break something or hurt yourself, a shutdown is really detrimental to your sense of self over time. Because when you continuously shut down or shut off when you're in pain, you are disconnecting yourself from yourself, and you're slowly going to lose your sense of identity. Finally, the last autistic trait that I want to cover, there are way more than this, but the last one I'm going to cover today, trait number 7, is special interests. Now, some people don't love the term special interests for several reasons. So some people prefer the term area of expertise, which I kind of love because special interests sometimes makes it sound like it's just something we're really interested in, whereas a lot of autistic people are truly experts on their areas of expertise. So special
Absolutely.
interests come from something called monotropic thinking, which is something that's very common in autistic people and sometimes other neurodivergent people as well. And monotropic thinking is basically this. It's the idea that we don't tend to have very extensive knowledge. Instead, we tend to have really intensive knowledge, very deep knowledge on just one or two topics. And when I say deep knowledge, again, it is not just like, oh, I know several fun facts about this. It's I understand this concept with a depth that you would expect from like an academic scholar. Now, our special interests aren't always academic in nature, although sometimes they can be. Many autistic people have a special interest in psychology because it helps us learn how to interact with others. That was the case for me. But other folks have a special interest in plants or bugs. I just read a book about a girl whose special interest was the 90s. Also, by the way, it makes me feel very old that for some autistic folks, their special interest is a decade I was born in. That's wild. But special interests are a really special part of being autistic. It's something a lot of us really like most of the time, and it brings us a lot of joy to interact with our special interest. What are you doing? Oh, me? I'm working on a resource roundup for one of my one-on-one clients. What is a resource roundup? It's a really cool collection of Instagram accounts, academic articles, online tests they can take, podcast episode, YouTube channels, and so many more resources that pertain specifically to what we've talked about in our sessions. That actually sounds really helpful. What do you put in a resource roundup? Well, for this particular client, we are primarily focusing on shame and stories we tell ourselves about who we are and how we can tell stories that are more helpful, more honest, and more compassionate to ourselves. That's kind of awesome. Yeah, but I mean, for some of my clients, we focus a lot more on productivity. For other clients, we focus on emotional dysregulation. And for other clients, we focus on interpersonal relationships. It's super, super customizable when you work with me one-on-one. So what should people do if they're watching right now and they want their own resource roundup? They want to work with you. Oh, they can just go to the description and book a discovery call with me. I love meeting with people before I decide to work with them just to make sure we're a good fit. Oh, yeah, get back to work and we'll get back to the video. Oh yeah, thanks, okay. All right, now we're gonna transition to signs of ADHD. The first sign of ADHD being that you don't have an input filter. So not having an input filter basically means that there is no system in my brain designed to filter out unimportant information, which means I'm getting all the information at once. Now I'm in a relatively low stimulation environment right now, but I can still see the light from my laptop right there. I can see the leaves of the tree over there moving. I can hear the electricity in the next room. I can feel the carpet underneath my feet. And it's a lot to tune out as I try to talk to you, let alone if I'm in a high stimulus environment, like at a bar or at a party. This is why a lot of ADHDers show signs of auditory processing issues because, yeah, our ears work just fine. When we go to get a hearing test, we're in a quiet, low stimulus environment and we can hear just fine. But you put us in a loud environment, we've got no filter to filter out the sounds of glasses clinking, the sounds of 18 different conversations happening, the sounds of everybody's high heels clacking. We hear all of it and it's so hard to focus on what the person in front of us is saying. Sign of ADHD number 2 is rejection sensitivity. So many ADHDers report signs of rejection sensitivity, just being really, really sensitive to real or perceived rejection. And some of this might be innate. It might just be part of the brain development of ADHD, but there's also a lot of research to suggest that this also comes from lived experience. A study found that ADHD students were 4 times more likely to receive negative feedback on their behavior in school than their non-ADHD counterparts. ADHDers are used to being rejected and criticized, like a lot. So can you really blame us for being hyper vigilant on the lookout for more rejection? We're just trying to protect ourselves. ADHD trait number 3 is boredom. Painful
Very
boredom.
right there.
You might be thinking, Megan, you just said you have zero input filter. Everything's coming at you all of the time. Surely there's something to focus on so that you don't get bored, like always, right? Wrong, my friend. That's where you're wrong. The constant input, I think, actually leads to our boredom. We experience so much input all the time that nothing jumps out at us as the most important thing. And so it's hard to pick something to focus on, which leads to us feeling listless and bored. ADHD trait number 5 is one that we actually heard in the autism section as well, and that is emotional dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation goes hand in hand with ADHD as well. ADHD is sometimes described as a condition where you've got a series of light switches in your head, right? There's the now or not now light switch, right? Our complete misperception of time. Everything either exists right now in this moment or it doesn't exist at all. The same concept applies to our emotions. A lot of us experience something I like to call emotional object permanence, or a lack thereof. If we're not feeling it in the moment, it feels like we never have felt it and we never will feel it. Which is great when we're happy, right? Because it's like, oh, everything's fine and everything will always be fine. But when we're sad, it can lead to some really extreme hopelessness. Hyperfocus is another form of monotropic thinking. It's very different from autistic monotropic thinking, but hyperfocus is kind of when you get tunnel vision on a project you're working on, everything else fades out, and you just do the thing for like, you don't even know how long. This actually happened to me the other day. I was hyper-focusing on some work stuff and my husband scared the crap out of me because he popped up behind me out of nowhere. And I was like, you scared me. And he is like, Megan, I said your name like 3 times, but I didn't hear a thing. ADHD trait number 6 is difficulty starting, switching, and finishing tasks. So yeah, we generally just really struggle with productivity. We struggle with getting things done, whether that's starting, finishing, or switching from one task to another. Our brains are kind of like trains that are going at full speed and the brakes are broken. And so switching from one track to the other, you're not supposed to do that at high speeds. And so we struggle and it sends us off the rails completely. Or it's really hard to go from stopped to 1,000,000 miles an hour in a split second, which is like the only way our brain can comprehend starting. The idea of like slowly building up speed feels really foreign to a lot of us. And of course, stopping a train that's going 1,000,000 miles an hour is a difficult task, especially if you don't have brakes. ADHD trait number 7 is one that I mentioned previously, and that is the misperception of time, sometimes called time blindness. However, the blind and visually impaired community has asked us to move away from that term and to reserve the word blind for people who are visually impaired or blind. So instead, we are starting to use the term misperception of time. Or if you don't love the idea of misperceiving time, when really time is a weird concept and there's no wrong way to perceive it, which I totally get, Marta Rose at Divergent Design Studios on Instagram calls it neuroemergent time. And I'll put a link to her Instagram in the description for you. But basically, misperception of time is the idea that we do not perceive time in a linear fashion. Many ADHDers perceive time as more of a spiral or a light switch or any other number of metaphors, but anything other than a straight line, basically. And finally, ADHD trait number 8 is fidgeting or internal restlessness. One of the actual diagnostic criteria of ADHD, according to the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, is getting up when you're supposed to stay seated. And a lot of adults don't check that box because they're like, well, I want to get up, my brain is gone and totally wandering, but I know it's inappropriate to get up and walk around during a meeting, so I don't do it. So they think they don't fit the criteria, or if they have a professional working with them who doesn't really understand ADHD in adults, the professional might not recognize the internal restlessness that is involved there. Although I do want to mention some adults do actually still stand up when it's quote unquote inappropriate to do so. I am one of them. I used to have 3-hour classes in grad school, and I'm sorry, but there was absolutely no goddamn way I was gonna sit still for 3 hours. And so I would get up and take breaks whenever I needed to, and my professors never really said anything. I never asked for permission, but they never yelled at me either, so it was all good. So those are our ADHD traits, and we talked about our autism traits. So what does it look like when you experience both of these? AuDHD sign number 1 is emotional dysregulation, which I mentioned in both the autistic and ADHD traits. So it felt like I had to mention it again here. Basically, emotional dysregulation is a trait of both autism and ADHD. So if you have both, odds are very high that you experience a lot of emotional dysregulation. Personally, I experienced so much emotional dysregulation, especially in college, that I was misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder. Which, by the way, many people have. Bipolar disorder is a very real condition, and I'm not saying, oh,
A lot of people, particularly girls or females, ladies, whatever you want to call, they get misdiagnosed with mania or personality disorders or what is it, bipolar, that kind of thing's really, really common. Schizophrenia is another one. Um, Rather than getting diagnosed as autistic, which is really crazy because it just shows you how little people know about autism.
If you were diagnosed with bipolar, you're probably AuDHD. That's not at all what I'm going for here. That was just the case for me. AuDHD, emotional.
Yes, and they can co-occur, but a lot of times there's misdiagnoses going on.
Dysregulation can look like really, really big, really, really intense moods. AuDHD sign number 2 is inconsistent sleep needs. ADHDers are significantly more likely to experience sleep conditions, from narcolepsy to insomnia to restless legs. And due to our racing thoughts, we tend to get less sleep than the average person. However, a lot of autistic people need even more sleep than your typical person because we are processing so much input at such a high level all the time. So we need more rest.
Yeah, we're often accused of being lazy. The other thing is like in my case, I've got narcolepsy. So narcolepsy can be comorbid with autism.
So if we were just autistic, we might get more sleep. But when you're both, at least for me, I tend to ping pong between getting like no sleep and like getting up at 3 a.m. to do work and whatever, because I'm awake and I have energy and it's fine, to sleeping like 10 to 11 hours a day. Sign number 3 of AuDHD is a narrow window of tolerance. So basically, when you're autistic and you're hypersensitive, so this is for hypersensitive autistic folks, you tend to be overstimulated really easily. Too much stuff just sends you into a very uncomfortable place. But if you're ADHD, you're probably more prone to understimulation, which means if you don't have enough stimuli, you can get so bored that it's painful. Which means if you're AuDHD, you have a very narrow window where you actually feel properly stimulated. Not overwhelmed, but not bored. Just right. You're Goldilocks, and you're a really specific Goldilocks. Sign number 4 of AuDHD is actually self-medicating. Personally, I try to take a very harm reductionist approach when it comes to substances. So if substances help you cope with the world that you live in, I think there's a lot of good in that. I would rather you be here and alive and wholly, fully addicted to a substance than not have that substance and be gone. But I also want you to have a really wonderful quality of life, and sometimes substances don't lend themselves to that. It's a really complicated topic, and to be honest, it's a little bit beyond my scope of practice. I don't deal with substance use because I don't have a lot of lived experience in it, nor do I have academic study of substance use. So it's a little bit beyond my scope, but I did want to bring it up because it is so common amongst AuDHDers. Finally, sign number 5 of AuDHD is compensatory behaviors and masking. Masking is not really the right word for what's happening, because masking makes it sound like, oh, there's the real you underneath and you just put a mask over it and like everything, if you just take the mask off, there you are, the real you is still there. But in reality, I think masking is more like the building blocks you're using to become the person you are. You're starting to use other people's blocks instead of your own blocks. And so the masterpiece of your personhood doesn't really reflect you at the end of the day. And in order to unmask, it's not really about just taking a mask off. You kind of have to tear yourself apart and rebuild. And that's hard. And compensatory behaviors are basically just behaviors we use to compensate for our autistic or ADHD traits. So like some ADHDers I know are some of the most organized people on this planet, but it's because if they weren't, their entire lives would fall apart. So if you've spent years thinking,
okay, workplace adjustment, all about, oh my goodness gracious, wow. Okay, I'm gonna see what this.
The Thoughty Auti podcast.
Oh,
But
okay.
you touched on something around anxiety.
Okay, I watched that one actually earlier today. That one was not too bad.
A lot of videos about autism will focus on the struggles and the challenges of being autistic, but not very many explore the perspective of someone who is married to an autistic or spends a lot of time with someone autistic and the benefits that come with it. So today, I want to talk about some of the cool insight that I have had into the world of autism through my 20-year relationship with my husband, Chris. And it's not just access to awesome fidget gadgets like the Neato.
What's it like to be both? Okay.
Holy moly. Has it been a year? Is it 2022? Hi, salty possums. We're still here. If you're new here, welcome. I guess my rants on Instagram did not scare you away. We lost Betty White. I thought I would come on here and I would explain what it's like to be autistic and ADHD at the same time as a costumer. If I could describe what it's like, it would be mess. And mess. And more mess. Often in your own head, there are so many things that conflict with each other that you need, and so you're like constantly like, I need new things to get some dopamine, right? But then the other part of you is like, no, I need everything to be the same. That's the only way that any of this works. Don't you dare change anything at all. There's the sensory aspects, which are fun. Like, sometimes you just can't handle the noises of the machines and they stress you out. And sometimes you will hear your neighbor whisper in the other country over, like in Canada. And you will be like, oh my God, what is that noise? What is that noise? What is that noise? And then you tell everybody and they're like, what? Oh, and then on top of it, you can be exceptionally sensitive to noises that other people make, but then you will totally put on your headphones with like some music you absolutely love, crank it all the way up, and just totally rock out. And that makes sense somehow to your brain. I don't know how I get things done. I think the only reason why I get things done is because my ADHD needs me to do something or I will be too bored doing the same thing all the time. And then the autism basically jumps in and is like, you have to get this done. And the ADHD is like, no, I really don't want to. And autism is like, if you don't, I will have a meltdown. That's my life. But we have managed to create some really awesome stuff. Yeah, so I have piles of things throughout this area, but I have some general idea of what's in every pile. So that's always fun, and it depends on the day whether the ADHD actually remembers where the things are, like which pile they're in. There are days when the autism will literally look at everything and be like, no, this is not happening today. We're not doing this. And the ADHD is like,
I can't put anything away though.
What happens is I usually end up getting up to this place where I just can't take it. It's like the autism goes, you are cleaning something up today. And I'm like, okay, fine, all right, fine. So I will like reduce it to the place where it's okay, but not perfect, and like definitely not perfect. There is no perfection going on at all. But I'll get to the point where the autism will be like, okay, I can function again, and the ADHD is like, thank God, because I hate cleaning so